Hello, and welcome to the final lecture in the Who Do You Think You Are case study for class and community, exploring the social and economic history of Scousers. This week, we're going to be building on the foundations of the last lecture, in which there was serious unrest and civil disobedience seen in the early 80s in Liverpool during the Toxteth riots. This kind of violence that we saw in Toxteth was indicative not just of movements in Liverpool, but throughout the country. And to place this week's lecture in a wider context, we need to look at the phenomenon of English hooliganism. And a lot of the post industrial cities that had lost a lot of its trade and work saw the emergence of hooligan groups, especially in the northeast, northwest, and the West Midlands. Aston Villa, Birmingham, and Wolverhampton gained some of the most notorious football gangs in this time period. And a lot of these gangs had serious ties to racist groups such as the National Front, the emergence of black players, players who had or either arrived during the Windrush generation or were the second generation or after Windrush. These black players were becoming more prominent, and this was causing severe racism on football match days. And if you think in terms of Liverpool, you had players like John Barnes, who were some of the strongest players, but were subject to vile racial abuse, including bananas being thrown on the pitch and gorilla noises being made. This was not just a Liverpool related thing, this was seen throughout England. Manchester United famously got banned from European Cup competitions in 1977 after rioting took place in France. You also have someone killed at a game between Arsenal and West Ham. A Bolton fan gets stabbed. Millwall fans organise mass rioting in Luton in 1985 as well. But you have the emergence of London-based organised fighting. So two opposing teams, two different communities would face off against one another and have organised fights. So we often think of community as a positive phrase, but in this sense, extremely negative connotations were emerging. And football was seen, and football days were seen as an opportunity where you could forget the rest of your troubles in your life and get out, vent some pent up anger as well. Now, despite this, Liverpool wasn't particularly known for very violent gangs. Every fan base has problems, but Liverpool's were fairly insignificant compared to, say, Swansea or Millwall fans. However, one of the biggest tragedies and disasters of the 80s in sport was a result, not necessarily of hooligans from Liverpool, but unruly behaviour. And this happened in 1985 in the Heysel Stadium. And Liverpool in 1984 had won the European Cup for a fourth time. In 85, they reached the European Cup final again, where they were set to play Juventus. And in 1985, it was held at the Heysel Stadium, which is in Belgium. Now, before the match kicked off, there was a huge stampede of Liverpool fans. And if you look at the top right of the screen, you can see the stadium layout. And the Liverpool fans were mainly in the two red sections, X and Y, on the map. And they were meant to be kept away from the Juventus fans, which are the white sections, O, N, and M. However, a lot of Juventus fans had ended up in section Z, right next to the two red sections. And this led to trouble, growing tension before the game. Bottles were thrown by both sides, but no one really knows what happened that led to this charge by Liverpool fans to get through the barriers to Area Z to get to the Juventus fans. However, whether it was provoked by the Italians or whether it was just spontaneous from the Liverpool fans, a wall collapses and 39 people end up dying, predominantly Juventus fans. And this really tarnishes the image of not just Liverpool football fans, but Scousers in general, who are seen to make up the Liverpool supporters. And this really has wide implications, and people from Liverpool get tarnished with this brush, even though these sort of incidences had been happening fairly frequently. Um, Liverpool fans get blamed for this, and there is a considerable amount of blame that should be placed on them. But another factor is that the stadium was in disrepair, and this is a constant problem throughout Europe in this time period. That stadiums were simply unsafe, and the British government's investigation into the disaster says that the deaths were attributable very, very largely to the appalling state of the stadium. But as a result of the Heysel Stadium disaster, Liverpool are banned from playing in any European competitions until 1991, which really affects their ability to be known as a European force. But it's not just Liverpool who are banned from playing in European Cup competitions, all English teams are. So Everton, who were another big side, Manchester United, Tottenham, Arsenal, they all qualify for Europe after 1985 and the subsequent years, but they are not allowed to play in Europe. So there is a huge amount of resentment from opposition football fans against the Liverpool supporters, specifically, seeing them as the reason they can't participate in European club football. And in many ways, this resentment continues for a long time, and arguably to this day, Liverpool fans are often targeted specifically for quite extreme abuse and are still known in some sections as murderers for what happened during the Heysel Stadium disaster. So, what had been an immense positive in quite a dark time, socially and economically, all of a sudden, football became known for negative connotations. And not being able to participate in Europe was a serious economic problem for the club. But it wouldn't be the only football related tragedy that Liverpool experienced in the 1980s. And whilst you might not have heard of the Heysel disaster, you probably almost certainly have heard of the Hillsborough disaster, which happened for a number of reasons. Because of the amount of crushes and charges and football hooliganism that was taking place in the sport in England at the time, high steel fences were placed up in stadiums to stop people from charging on the pitch or charging at opposition fans. However, this, of course, created serious problems when crushes started to form, and especially in standing sections of the stadium, this could quite easily happen. Now, like the Heysel Stadium, Hillsborough was a very old stadium and falling into disrepair and was simply unsafe. And lots of stadiums in England and Europe were in these conditions, and it was only a matter of time until a disaster happened. In fact, in 1978, there was a safety inspection of the Hillsborough Stadium where Sheffield Wednesday played, and it was said that it was not fit to pass. However, it was much better than lots of other stadiums, so they allowed crowds to keep coming to the ground. So even though it failed the safety inspection, it was still in use. And this really goes to show how poor safety protocols were during the 80s. And Hillsborough was often used as a neutral venue for FA Cup semi finals. In the 1981 FA Cup final between Tottenham and Wolves, a crush had occurred and there were 38 injuries, broken bones. People nearly died in this incident. And again, this issue of safety and specifically Hillsborough's safety was brought up. However, the Sheffield Wednesday chairman famously said that these concerns were absolute bollocks, which would unfortunately prove not to be the case moving forward. And Liverpool, specifically, the year before the Hillsborough disaster happened, played there in an FA Cup semi final and complained about the state and safety of the stadium, which was ignored by the FA. And this unfortunately led to the actual disaster in April 1989, the next year, where Liverpool were playing Nottingham Forest in the FA Cup semi final. Hillsborough again being used as a neutral venue for the two teams to play. In the hours before the game, there had been a few hold-ups on the motorway, and this meant that lots of fans were late and trying to get into the stadium as kickoff occurred. There was also the logistical problem of the Leppings Lane entrance to the stadium, which runs along a river and funnels fans into a bottleneck. And if you look at the map of the stadium below me on the screen, you can see how 5,000 fans turning up at a similar time could cause crowding in this very narrow area. And what happens is police are unaware and they are unorganized, and very quickly they realize they have to do something to relieve the amount of people in the stadium. So they quickly open all of the turnstiles and the crowd floods in. Unfortunately, the way that tickets had been distributed before the game meant that the majority of fans at the stadium were Liverpool fans, but they were in smaller areas of the stadium. The Nottingham Forest fans, who had much fewer tickets, were in the largest stands of the area. So when the Liverpool fans crowded into the stadium, advised by the police, a crush happened against these huge steel gates that had been erected to avoid hooligans running onto the pitch. And chaos and confusion takes over at the stadium as people are thrown over the fence to try and escape. One of the fence bursts, and police think that it is a crowd invasion, but people are simply crushed to death against the fence. It's the largest number of deaths at a sporting event in British history, with 96 people dying and a further 766 severely injured. The way that the ambulances were organized on the day meant that they couldn't easily access the stadium. There were eventually 45 ambulances outside, but they simply couldn't get onto the pitch because of the chaos and commotion. And I think one of the most tragic elements of Hillsborough is the age of the victims. Of the 96 who died, 78 were under 30. If you look at the numbers below me in the table, 38 were between 10 and 19. Literal children simply going to watch a match of football. And this is one of the great tragedies of it. No one expected to send their kids to a game that day, only for them to be crushed to death because of logistical organization. One of the youngest who died was John Gilhooly, who actually was the cousin of Stephen Gerrard, who was 8 at the time and would go on to become club captain and legend for the club. There is also the case of Stephen Will, who's considered to be the 97th victim of Hillsborough, who couldn't make the match that day because of a work commitment. And Stephen riddled by guilt for giving his friend his ticket, and his friend dying there, ended up committing suicide. And since Hillsborough, further few, two or three more people have killed themselves as a result of this. So the ramifications of Hillsborough were far beyond football. It shocked the Liverpool community as a whole, not just Liverpool fans, but anyone who's a supporter of either Liverpool or Everton know there are reds and blues in most families, and this was profoundly felt by both clubs. And whenever I go to the game, and when most people go to the games, you still go and pay your respects at the memorial, which you can see on the bottom right of the screen. And something that always stands out to me is how young so many of the victims were that day. So many 13 and 14-year-olds, and this devastated the footballing community, who was primarily working class Scousers. And it is amongst this heartache where it is further exacerbated by the response of the national media as well as the international community. UEFA's president, before knowing the intricacies of the situation, Jacques Georges, describes Liverpool supporters as beasts. There is an assumption, because of what happened at Heysel and the poor behaviour of Liverpool fans there, that this was simply hipstery repeating itself. And more than a few opposition fans believed that this was karmic retribution to the Liverpool fans who played a role in the deaths of the Juventus fans at Heysel. And it fit into a narrative after the Toxteth riots of 81, after the cries of being victimized after World War II, after the huge unemployment in Liverpool. The media attacked the Liverpool fans and literally printed lies. The most famous front page as a result of the Hillsborough disaster is from The Sun, which is banned in most newsagents in Liverpool, banned from Anfield, actually. And myself and many other Liverpool supporters actually have anti Sun posters in our house. Usually, the word "the Sun" is asterisked out like a swear word. It has become utterly repugnant in the city because of what it has done to the community. And ironically, saying that they were telling the truth of the situation, they print complete unsubstantiated lies. If we look at the language used, some fans pocketed the victims who were dying. So Liverpool fans are portrayed as traitors to their own, thieves, and incredibly disrespectful. They said that fans urinated on the policemen who were trying to sort out the situation and beat up a police constable giving the kiss of life to someone else. The Liverpool fans are demonized and portrayed as evil, um, and disgusting, morally reprehensible. And this was portrayed for a solid year after the event. The whole of the city felt as though they were being attacked. And it's not just The Sun. The Sun is simply one of the newspapers most famous for it, but the Daily Mail, the Express. These lies are perpetuated throughout multiple news outlets, and this affects Liverpool's image, which had already been damaged because of the Toxteth riots, already damaged because of the Heysel disaster, and Liverpool and Scousers are demonised. However, it's a year later you start to get investigations into what happened. The most famous of which is the inquest of Lord Justice Taylor. And the Taylor report is really important turning point in understanding the Hillsborough disaster. Taylor, after much investigating, concludes that the main reason for the disaster was the ineptitude of the South Yorkshire police, that they were slow to respond to the growing number of fans, that they simply didn't react quickly enough. And the opening of the turntiles made the situation infinitely worse. At, at best, the Yorkshire police were described as misinformed and slightly, you know, bumbling incompetent. But at worst, they were described as criminally negligent and directly leading to the deaths of the Liverpool fans. There was also the beginning of suggestions that the police covered up their incompetence. 164 eyewitnesses had their statements altered. 116 had negative remarks they made about police handling of the situation removed from their testimony. Um, there's also the added insult that as this came out, the first autopsy of many of the fans came out, and the coroner, Dr. Stephen Popper, returned the verdict of accidental death to the 96 rather than manslaughter. And what is really controversial about this is Dr. Popper is seen out celebrating with police fans the night after this verdict is reached, and he is seen by family members of people who died at Hillsborough. This becomes an incredibly traumatic shared trauma for the entire footballing community and wider community of Liverpool. And it really marks the decline of Liverpool as a successful footballing club as well. The manager of Liverpool at the time and former player, Kenny Dalglish, quits because he simply cannot cope. He has post traumatic stress. A lot of the other players do as well, and they end up leaving because it is simply too much to cope with. Dalglish is remembered as a hero in this time period. One day he attended 4 funerals and really began to take a wider role in the Liverpool community, but it was simply too much for one man to cope with. So not only does it mark a turning point in the negative image of Liverpool Football Club, but the success that it had achieved as well. And it is another 30 years before Liverpool win the lead league in England. So despite all the darkness that had happened post World War, Liverpool had had music and football to be proud of, but the Hillsborough disaster marks the turn of its success in football as well. So it is an incredibly dark time period. And since those original findings, despite the fact that the police were signalled out for their incompetence and Sheffield Wednesday Stadium as a disaster, no one gets prosecuted. No one is punished for this awful incident. Unlike at Heysel, where Liverpool fans were arrested and sent to prison for manslaughter, that didn't happen in the case here. And since then, there have been numerous groups. The Hillsborough Family Support Group, Spirit of Shankly, and Justice for 96 have continually campaigned for justice for the 96, displaying the sense of community, not just in football groups, but throughout Liverpool. And they would not have been able to continue if there wasn't continual donations from the wider community as well. And despite their constant pressure and this sense of community, it is not until April 2016 where a second coroner's report is produced. And the coroner's report returns the verdict of unlawful killing because of gross negligence of several individuals and groups. So this is an important milestone. This is vindication for many of the families of those who have died, that it was nothing to do with Liverpool fans, but it was the stadium, the condition of the stadium, and the incompetence of the South Yorkshire police. what is revealed in this time period as well, and there are many investigations over the years, but the 2016 one is the most important. What is revealed is that Duckenfield, who was head of the police on that day and whose decision it was to open the turnstiles, admitted lying during the initial investigation in '89. And he had told newspapers and police that Liverpool fans had rushed the turnstiles and gates open, which was a falsification. It also turns out that a local Conservative MP in Sheffield wanted to deflect blame away from the police force and passed fake information onto the press, including the Sun, to divert negative attention away. So there has been, since '89, a combined effort from police, from politicians, and the media to demonize Liverpool fans, to demonize Scousers, even though they did nothing wrong. Eventually, the Sun is forced to print a retraction of their story and apologise. But something that annoyed a lot of Liverpool fans and people more generally was that it was on page 10 of the newspaper, hidden away in an attempt to um, separate them from what they had done, the lies they had printed. Um, but despite all of these new findings, the vast majority of people, including Duckenfield, have never been charged for anything that happened that day. And this is still an incredibly emotive topic for the families of those uh, who died at Hillsborough. And I was there in 2016 when the announcement was made, and um, there was this incredible spontaneous singing of "You'll Never Walk Alone," which is kind of where I'm going to finish the module. "You'll Never Walk Alone" has become synonymous with the club and the community. Originally written in 1945 for a musical, it was covered in 1963 by a local Merseyside group called Jerry and the Pacemakers. And Bill Shankly heard it and loved it so much that he included it on his choices for Desert Islet Discs, which was a famous radio show at the time. And this gets picked up by the Copites and is sung regularly. But it becomes increasingly poignant after the events of Hillsborough and the combined attempts to try and get justice for those who had died. And it is sung before every game now. And I think if we are talking about a module that is to do with class and community, and we're thinking about what a community is, it is simply a collection of people who are not alone. And um, whether it is singing it on the terraces or the sentiment throughout the wider community, that is what I am talking about in terms of Scousers and wider groups. It is people coming together for a combined cause or through a combined love of something. And despite the horrendous treatment of the Liverpool fans after this, the city has had somewhat of a renaissance, especially since the year 2000. In 2008, it was made the European capital of culture. There have been amazing music festivals and art festivals, including one of my favourite, which is on the bottom of your screen, the Liverpool Giants, which were taken across the city. And in terms of football, a sense of pride has more recently been introduced with Liverpool winning the European Championship in 2019 and the Premier League in 2020. And the face of a multicultural new Liverpool is Trent Alexander-Arnold, who is mixed race but grew up working class in Liverpool, but has won a Champions League and Premier League medal already. And that sense of pride is returning, but also questions around what it is to be a Scouser. So in the first lecture, I mentioned them booing the British national anthem, but adopting a German in Jurgen Klopp, who is known as an honorary Scouser. So, what is it to be Scouse? Do you have to be from Liverpool? Is it an attitude? Is it a series or set of shared beliefs? These debates are being brought up again. My main concluding points are on this slide that you can pause and read in more detail. But I want to build on in the seminar what I was just touching upon then about what it is to be a Scouser. I'd first like you to read John Husson and Ramon Spargi's You Are Always on Our Mind, the Hillsborough tragedy as cultural trauma, and that idea of a community tragic event shaping what that community is. And that's from the Acta Sociologica um, journal, volume 54, number 3, and that's available on JSTOR. So if you could read that, I would. I'm also going to put a bunch of Hillsborough documentaries and articles on Moodle for you to read and watch, and some of them are brilliant at exploring what that community went through. I also want you to think about the following questions, though. One, why was football so important to Scousers, especially from the 80s onwards, compared with other cities? Two, how did Hillsborough change feelings of identity within Liverpool? Three, is class a major feature of being a Scouser? Four, are Scousers right to feel othered by the rest of the country? They are often uh, accused of being victims by other footballing groups. So, are they right to feel that or not? And then finally, what is the most important feature of being a Scouser? I look forward to hearing your opinions on this in the seminar. Thank you.